Before we get started, check the link in the description for this episode's notes and a free Warrior Mindset ebook. Now, on to our show.
The reason for this is that human beings, by nature, are expansive creatures.
Yes.
And laws themselves can be suppressive.
They can.
So if you apply the laws and the rules and the regulations to the systems and not to the people, if you want to operate within the system, then you operate within this set of rules. It's like playing a game.
Welcome back, my friends. You've tuned into Olaf and Eric on Eric's Mindset Podcast, where we explore deep transformation, personal awakening, and breaking free from the mental and spiritual loops that keep us stuck. Do you ever feel like no matter how hard you try to control things, life keeps throwing you off course? What if control is actually an illusion, and letting go is the key to true freedom? In today's episode, my friend and coach of over 10 years, Olaf Eric, and I are diving into the illusion of control, why we cling to it, how it keeps us stuck, and what happens when we finally let go. We'll be covering why the need for control creates suffering, how surrender leads to clarity, peace, and true power, and practical steps to release resistance and trust life's flow. If you've ever struggled with uncertainty, overthinking, or feeling like you need to control everything, this conversation might just shift something in you.
Existence is there to help. And I think that's the idea that maybe the major, or at least one of the major ideas. Now we're on. Yes.
Good. I love
we just turned that on.
Existence.
Existence is there to help.
Existence is salutary. Existence is there to help us. I mean, look how existence keeps us going day in and day out without our thinking about it, without my having to computerize my existence. I better program myself for tomorrow right, or I might not make it tomorrow. Oops, I pressed the wrong button. You die. Sorry. My biosystem operates so much by itself. In fact, my consciousness sometimes gets in the way of the wisdom of my body.
Oh, most certainly. Yeah. I mean, and I was just telling you how my hip was hurting me because my muscles are tight because I think I dehydrated my muscles a bit. Yeah. And so now that it stops you dead in your tracks as far as, look, I don't care what you got going on in your life. This is what you have to take care of right now. The vessel.
But there are people today who are not savvy with the multiplication table. They admit it because they're so depending on the phone or the watch, on externals to almost count for you.
Oh yeah.
There's real power to say 9 times 9, 81.
Well, that's
empowering.
An interesting thing is now we've become responsible for maintaining muscles that we don't know. That we don't have to use anymore, right? So
like mental muscles?
Yeah, I mean, it happens mentally and physically. To bring aliens into the topic, because I love aliens. This is one of the ideas behind like that prototypical gray alien is that they're
with a thin jaw, buckle head, piercing eyes.
Well, the things that developed over time, but there's an idea that those are us from the future. They come back to us because they sort of lost their soul. So that we don't need our physical abilities so much anymore, and so you have that smaller body. But the idea is that as we develop tools over time, especially with AI, and especially with in the future, nanotechnology will be big. How these things can create things from a molecular level just on the spot. And even now we just have like 3D printing. We're just at the beginning of something pretty incredible. And so
what kind of human will we be?
The idea would be that we want to focus our intent towards, okay, now we don't have to do the more menial things. now we're responsible. Now we can use our time to not go into heathenistic territory, but to go more towards a godly type creature.
As we augment our humanity more and more with extraneous extra tools, like now, to go to Holy Google, I have to look at my phone. But what if they put the Holy Google on somehow in my specs? What if they put a little chip in my brain? The thing that strikes me as a practicing humanist, psychologist, theologian, life coach, spiritual director of many years, is our humanity is a continuing experiment. Our humanity is not like a set robotic like given. And our job is to approximate that robotness. And the more we approximate that robotness, the more real we are. In fact, that's what autocrats do. That's what autocratic governments, autocratic entities do. They said, this is what it means to be a full participatory citizen in our country. Here's what human means in our country. You don't have speech rights, but you have comfort in just agreeing. Things like that. You don't have meeting rights. But you can have the comfort that the state is taking care of you, et cetera, et cetera. I know I'm having kind of a political nuances here.
Oh, we've already determined that political nuances are okay.
Yeah, they're okay.
Because,
we are political creatures. We are about power systems that determine who gets what and how. That's a nice, handy way to understand politics. Power systems that determines who gets what and how. And so Aristotle, the philosopher I just read recently, had three basic kinds of governing structures that he observed as he visited well over 100 different nations in his time. And those three structures basically were characterized as tyranny-violence. Tyranny-violence. Putin is a good example of that. North Korea, is a good example of that. Then, the second is monarchy-oligarchy. Monarchy, kings, queens, dictators, not tyrannical dictators, but maybe kind of softer dictators, kinder, nicer dictators. I won't kill you, but you'll be in jail 13 years. But when I'm too old to be bothered with, you can come out and do your thing. And finally, our kind, polity and democracy. And polity, it implies law, rules, norms. True freedom government is a government of laws, not people, because people will take over and they'll basically become monarchs and oligarchs or tyrants and even violators.
Do you think that if people left to their own devices will take over and become monarchs?
Well, humankind is always challenged on the third kind, the most challenging, difficult, and yet the best kind is polity and democracy, of which, of course, our constitutional order is an example.
Well, because see,
that's polity and democracy.
The reason I'm asking is because that's an argument for more laws.
I'm not talking about over-regulation. I'm talking about fundaments like, can you be arrested just because they don't like your face or don't like the podcast? And suddenly, knock, 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 and you get arrested, thrown in jail. And you have no rights as to why am I being arrested? Is there evidence? Am I considered innocent until proven guilty? You see, that's law. And we are benefited by the law, and benefited by the principle. If we're going to be arrested by the authorities, there needs to be a valid basis, an external, objective basis. You could look at this as being encumbering or freeing. Order and laws, if they are not overdone, over-oppressive, actually can be freeing, just like freeways. Is it free if I can drive 80 in a 25-mile neighborhood killing kids? Is that freedom? No. Driving 25 in a family neighborhood full of kids on the streets is actually freeing.
Right.
It frees me to be aware of kids. It frees the kids to jump out of the way in time. You know, the legal is not necessarily all oppressive. And I remember Rush Limbaugh. Now, believe it or not, I'm going to quote Rush Limbaugh.
Okay.
You know, the Ditto Man, I call him.
The Ditto Man.
You know, and he was so talented on the air. I mean, you know, in his early days, I like listening to him because he was a fresh voice. I didn't know, most of the time I didn't agree with his perspectives, but I like listening to him because he and his frame of reference made sense. But I'll never forget the time he said, the problem with our society is we are so caught up in being free from the government, free from laws, free from constraints, free from regulations. But he said, there's the other side, free for. True freedom is not just what are you free from, but what are you free for? And the human experiment is built around the whole architecture of what we as a people believe we need to be free from governmental oppression, free for separation of church and state, which I so stand by. It allows religions to be themselves and to influence people in legitimate ways through persuasion, through inspiration, you know, through conversation. Not, you must be this religion or we'll jail you, you know. So freedom from and freedom for. And a mature human being begins to tailor an architecture, you might call it a moral architecture in their lives, that is well balanced between the two.
Freedom for. Could you describe that a little bit?
Well, like I said, freedom for driving safely, you know, in a neighborhood. And there are derivatives. If I drive more slowly, you know, I see more what's happening, and I see a kid doing something fun and silly on a porch on the side of the road, etc. Free for writing an article and sending it to a newspaper or sending it to my congressperson. You know, I am free to express myself. You know, free to speak. You know, and I, having been in the ROTC, never was comfortable in desecrating the American flag. I remember the anti-Vietnam days, but I respected the right of protesters to do that. You know, there were conservative people saying they should be arrested, they should be punished for desecrating it. I get that. But if we truly value free speech, we need to value that which we're not comfortable hearing or that which we disagree with. And especially in the religious sphere, the theological sphere, your view of the sacred, oh my goodness, makes no sense to me. There were times if I said that, I would be burned at the stake in our own country. Now I can freely say, hey, man, my belief system is so different from yours. Let's talk.
I'm fairly certain I have past life remembrances.
You know, freedom for loving, being a loving person, you know, compassion, caring for others. Sometimes people may think, you know, caring for others is a burden, and there can be elements of responsibility and burden. But there is something freeing of our spirit and our goodness, innate goodness, innate aliveness that comes with freedom for caring, freedom for taking responsibility for my elder who is suddenly, you know, losing it mentally to Alzheimer's, the freedom to make space in an extra bedroom. Do I really want to? If I'm really honest, gosh, I don't really want to. And yet freedom for I will. It's kind of like a willing knowing. It's a moral wanting to. I want to because it's the right thing, not because it's the most pleasurable thing. When you bring an Alzheimer's person, and I have visited Alzheimer's families when I was a faith community leader, so I can share stories of the incredible pain and the incredible love that family members who were not inflicted with that disease, the burden upon them in caring for someone just totally losing They're losing themselves, losing their sense of things. They're feeling their terror, their screams.
It does. It always pays to create constraints within a system. I don't necessarily believe in restraints on a being itself. I definitely disagree with fundamentally restraints on a being itself, or restraints within the restraints of a system. Because the reason for this, and it's we are using words which you have to be careful with, is
absolutely.
The reason for this is that human beings by nature are expansive creatures.
Yes.
And laws themselves can be suppressive.
They can.
So if you apply the laws and the rules and the regulations to the systems and not to the people, if you want to operate within the system, then you operate within this set of rules. It's like playing a game. It's like operating within any set system, not oppressing the person or the people themselves. It's just my take on that.
Yeah, and I think this is a complex, rich topic, and I think there is kind of an emotional component to it, kind of a baseline emotional component where we might emotionally feel like the less encumbering laws, the better.
I agree.
Or we may have a more conservative emotional predisposition to say the more laws to help us get to our goals, to guide us, not as gods, but as guides, as goals, the better. And in some sense, both sides have merit. And again, it's a matter of finding that balance. Because, and the word that came to mind as you're talking about the freedom of being, well, we are embodied beings. I'm free to eat a ton of food. I'm free to just drink myself drunk every night. I'm free. Free from constraints, right? Should I be surprised if I am 30 pounds overweight quite quickly? I'm feeling sloggy and I'm starting to get high blood pressure and starting to get other things. So I think of the word that came in the back of my mind as I was hearing you, discipline. You and I discipline our bodies so that our bodies are healthy, so that we can be of good mind as we work in our field.
Oh, yeah.
So I am, in some sense, I am free for the disciplines that make my body thin and working well as an octogenarian. And I work hard at it. My first addiction was food. I'm a foodaholic. I'm a recovering foodaholic. And my first 12-step group that I got connected with actually was OA, Overeaters Anonymous. Before I owned the fact that I'm also an alcoholic, over drinking and especially the over drinking led to more and more stinking thinking. That's the point. And anyway, so every day, my being off the wagon, as I don't drink, I cannot not eat. But I dare not get off counting my calories and looking at every item I take in terms of calories in, and energy out.
Yeah.
And thank goodness to the gift of Fitbit, because the Fitbit is a marvel in helping me on calories in, energy out.
Yeah.
And steps and so on, a number of calories in a day. And it's been so helpful. I've had them on for about 15 years or whenever Fitbit started. It's really helpful to a foodaholic that has to count our calories and watch everything we eat.
Yeah. Well, I see. I'm less on the calories. It's more about the carbohydrates for me.
Sure.
It's like the carbohydrates are like a heavy drug.
But you've got to have some carbs, and there are good carbs and bad carbs. Good carbs, I eat a bowl of brown rice. Bad carbs, I eat a big bag of chips.
That is definitely the case. Processed sugars and
Sure.
white starchy foods. And we all each have different bodies and we each take different things.
The thing is to tune into your body and know how, I thought about this as one of the themes of what we talk about. Treating your body as a sacred vessel. It is. Paul uses that metaphor in his letters. Your body is the temple of the sacred spirit. Well, how do we treat our temple? Am I just abusing it? Am I taking my psychic pains and expressing it through my body? And so, in effect, I treat my body badly because I really then down deep feel badly about myself. I mean, there's all kinds of ways we can work against ourselves. And do we treat our bodies as sacred organisms, which they are, of the energies of life, the energies of the ultimate, the energies of the light? We do that as embodied beings.
Mm-hmm.
And if I mess up my body with overeating, miseating, and misusing, and misdrinking, I ain't going to see the light. The only light I'm going to see is in my own drunk head.
Yeah. Okay. So that actually, that almost seems to get back to the laws, is because it seems as if, in our natural state of beingness, life itself seeks a state of homeostasis. It knows how to take care of itself. And it's more of a godly creature that acts like the fool, which, I've been getting into lately, is working on, is looking into these tarot cards. But as we put more restrictions and laws and structures and things into our environment because we believe that it's going to help us out, whether it's technology or it's a new rule or it's a new law or it's a new structure or it's a new this or that or medication or a food, it takes time to understand how it works within the current system to see what effect that it has. And then it seems to have an effect of, it's much easier to do this over here now, but then that screws this up over here. And so we try to paint over the pump handle somehow over in this direction. And
shortcuts, and they don't work.
Yeah. Fundamentally, what I'm getting at is that I'm generally more for, as things grow up around you, that you yourself bring yourself back to what's built into you fundamentally. First of all, because it is the systems that further complicate things and create their own problems.
Correct.
And then they try to, and then the system creates its own problems and then tries to solve that problem, and then we end up astray off in this wilderness of, I don't know, whatever it is we're getting into. But what I'm getting at is that we want to come back to who we are fundamentally.
In this theme of being human, and being human is an ongoing experiment, I'm thinking in part of what you're talking about in terms of we humans always have a context in which we grow and become ourselves. But we also are not a tabula rasa when we are born, meaning just a blank sheet. No. We come with predispositions. We come with kind of a psychic architecture that is fundamentally who we are. That's encoded in our DNA. So I don't come neutral and then environment made Olaf what Olaf is. Olaf had a certain amount of givens.
Characteristics, sure.
Characteristics. So part of our humanity is a given, through the DNA, ongoing, the heritage. Our becoming human is also, as the field of psychology has grown to understand deeply, is the fundamental building blocks upon our baseline blueprint. Some people refer to, we come into this world blueprinted when we are born. You know, we have a certain blueprint, but then the architecture of that blueprint, how it's built, the life, the person that's built, you know, the first 5 to 7 years are very critical in the architecture of the self. We learn that, you know, from, you know, Freudian psychology and so on. But then we become increasingly, as we grow, we become increasingly complicated because we become a double to ourselves at adolescence. That's the transition. You know, until adolescence, we are kind of single responders. You know, I am the Olaf the responder. Hey, Olaf, I remember the time when I was, new in Chicago. We had just moved and my mom took us, my sister and me, to the beach, Chicago beachfront, when I was 10, 11, and met this other woman that brought her son, my age. And then one time the woman said, hey, Olaf, have you ever seen American baseball? Baseball? What's that? I kind of knew, but she said, oh, would you like to go to a baseball game? Professional. Mama? Oh, sure. Okay. And so a Cubs game.
Okay.
You know, and so that wasn't just an external thing. It became internalized. I want to do that. So we become who we are in response to our context, social possibilities. You know, but the point is, I internalize the softball as part of me and watching baseball and so on and so forth throughout my lifetime. You know, it's just part of my whole way of living Olaf out.
Okay.
You know, being the human I am, you know, and exposing to a faith, exposing to music, exposing to great learnings by really good teachers and great books and the like. We are internalizing absorptive creatures, but we absorb within a framework of our blueprint, early experiences, and the beauty of our field. Call it life coaching, spiritual direction, you know, practical therapy, all of these different approaches say you are not a stuck human person to what you were. You can grow to be freer. You can be freer from your encumberments and be free for who you could possibly be. You know, this free from and free for dynamic really comes in our field of spiritual psychology, you know, and free from our degradation and shame, a shame-based identity. So many addicts and alcoholics, they defeat themselves continually because they're shame-based. Down deep, don't believe that I deserve a good life because I have been such a shit and I have hurt so many people down deep. Down deep. We cannot fool ourselves. We fool thinking we fool ourselves. But down deep, we really don't fool ourselves. Now, I know that's a proposition. Some people can argue against it. You know, it's kind of like in philosophical psychology, you know, that there is a moral underpinning to existence. You know, we can't be bad and not have the effects of that. We, thank God, can be good and have the beneficial effects of that. The happiest people are generous people, compassionate people. That's been proven by research.
Well,
Free form.
Yeah. Oh, and I that's another, that gets into another thing that I want to change the perception of. It's not about, I don't think at all, I think it's a very simple way that we've tried to tell ourselves, this is good and this is bad, evil and good. But I don't think that that's the idea behind it at all. I think we're trying to steer ourselves in a different direction, much like a game or an adventure, is that this is the result, cause and effect, which is karma, essentially. It's the law of cause and effect. We have these structures that we work within, and that essentially is our fate. The structures that we were born within. I didn't choose my gender. I didn't choose my location in the universe. I didn't choose many of the things about me. These are fated. Mm-hmm. But within that, I have this free will
Yes.
at certain dimensions within that.
Yes.
And I like to think of it when I was a kid, we had these books called Choose Your Own Adventure.
That's a neat phrase.
Yeah,
I like
you
that.
could read through them and you come to the end of a paragraph and say, you choose, there'd be a dun, dun, dun sort of moment, and you'd say, do you want to do this or do you want to do this? And then you go to the appropriate page. Or I like to think of it like, maybe I didn't create the paints on the canvas, but I certainly paint the picture.
Mm-hmm.
So I do have these constraints and this framework
Sure.
to work within. But then within that, I develop and create the world that I wish to live in.
Of course, as you know, there is a faith system, from Indian spirituality, from the East, that says we're not fated on some pre-birth level in your spiritual evolution. You chose to be the life that you're living, to learn things in your soul's journey. I'm just saying that there are spiritual systems that operate not on the premise that you're fated, but in a sense you chose a framework to be fated in order to grow, to be challenged and grow and to learn something as a soul, that transmutes through different lives, different eras, and that is, the common term for that is reincarnation, as I understand it. Now, I'm sure a Hindu scholar would sit beside me and say, Olaf, you're so basic, and it's.
Well, I actually subscribe to that, not as a, there has been this, just as a side note, there has been this frustration over time is that the more time you spend in something, it's less of a belief and more of you come into knowledge of things, at least an angle of looking at them.
Yeah.
Not so much like I'm reading this and then I'm repeating what this guy has to say or subscribing to somebody else's philosophy is that, of course we go into our own consciousnesses and we discover what's there within the deep recesses.
Yes.
But as far as what you're saying, yeah, I the way I think of that is like playing a video game. It's like I choose the video game that I'm going to play, I pop it in the player, and then I go in and I play the character. Well, now there is some, structure that I just chose, but now that I'm in the character, I have to work within those constraints. Whether I'm that transcendent being who happens to be, in this case, the one who's sitting on the couch with the remote control, and or I'm the character in the game who has the constraints of the actual game that the transcendent being decided to step into. But
now, I personally don't ascribe to the reincarnation understanding of things. At the same time, I am humble enough to say, that's an area that I leave to you who ascribe to that to witness to. And the important thing for me regarding any faith system or religious construct is that what impact does it have on the person?
Yeah.
The individual person and how she or he lives, and on the collective person, the we, the us, because we are we, as there's a new book that has the title, conflates me and we. We are social beings. I have internalized all the people who have been important in my life. They are part of me. I'm a collective. I'm a collective Olaf. Yet I have a singular point of reference, and identity, but I am a collective of so many people that have impacted me. Some negatively, but I learned some lessons and can say in retrospect, part of me doesn't want to thank you, but a part of me has to, because as painful as that moment was, I learned something very, very important, and I confess up that, I was a director of an agency out west, a homeless service, and my style of leadership is not highly administrative in terms of controlling and seeing, but more entrusting, empowering, trust the process. And I had a more liberal director of the board, and we were copacetic. He trusted me. He trusted his more process-oriented kind of management that I did. And then a new president of the board came on board, a former railroad supervisor of blue-collar people. And so was it any surprise that he looked at me and was horrified by this process management that, hey, it's got to be carrot stick. You got to measure. You got to control. I'm kind of overstating it, but that was really the distinct difference. And so there was a political clash, kind of a tonal, an undercurrent clash that we just didn't see eye to eye on things. And finally, he and a very bright guy from the community that I respected, from the faith community that I participated in, they came as a dyad to me and said, this is not working, and we would like it. And this was kind of at the 2-year point. We would like it if you'd be willing to resign, to leave, And I just started, and I had just hired a new manager that I knew we could work well together. Someone who would make up for my process stuff and cross the T's and dot the I's better and so on. It's not that I was a schlep management-wise, but I was trusted, empowered, and you got to measure, you got to stay on top of, And they said, look, it is clear that you have a talent to be like a program director, but you're not an effective administrative director.
Right.
Naked truth.
Yeah.
A program director, teaching, setting up a workshop, even podcasting perhaps in some sense, so we don't program it.
Sure.
We're totally spontaneous. And so with pain, they said, look, and this was after 2 years. We'll give you 3 months severance, full pay. This is as good as we can do. I talked to, some people on the back porch talk, as I call it. And I knew I could fight it, and probably by board count could win a fight. But at what price?
Sure.
At what price would I win a fight? But would I really win in the long run? Having a resentful director of the board lose a vote by 1 or 2 folks who like me enough to keep me?
Right.
No, and I knew that it wouldn't be good for the agency either. Now, that was a painful lesson, but it was a good lesson. Since then, except for a short foray as a temporary director, I stay away from administrative directorships. It's more creative programming, teaching, workshopping, working with groups, people,
Yeah, well, that's like the Steve Jobs, Steve Wozniak thing.
Yes, thank you. That's a good, yes.
Well, that's something I've gone over too. Since I was 12, 13 years old, I was running pool crews. But this also happens to be what I'm very good at is construction.
Yeah.
So, you
have the girth for it. You have the size for it.
You saying I'm fat?
No. Tall, what are you, 6'2"?
Yeah.
6'2", and good looking, but you have stature. And I can imagine blue collar bosses, they do better with their stature.
Yeah, well, it doesn't hurt, but yeah, that's what you're going after. You're balancing this thing between, you ever see, there's a old joke. I don't know if it was just between us and construction or not, but when you see a road crew on the side of the road and the only one working is the boss, and everybody else is standing around, that's kind of the balancing act that you play, because that's the person who knows what needs to be done, is the best at it. But then when you get to that point where you're running the crew, then you need to be the teacher. Mm-hmm. Even in my case, with regard to swimming pools, is what I grew up building. I was very young when I became a teacher. Mm-hmm. I was 17 years old and I was running crews. 16 or 17. Yeah.
Wow.
I would love how we
talk
would
about
show
someone with a natural authority.
Well, we would show up at the houses and they would go, wait a minute, you guys are building a pool? Where's the adult? You know,
Here, 17-year-old adult.
Yeah, but which was something we always got a kick out of because we could do, you know, at that point, the crew that we had was very experienced, even though we were very young, and we could do the job as good as anybody.
All right.
Yeah. So we were highly skilled individuals.
So how does the learnings from that and that role that you implemented quite effectively, how is that part of your spirituality now?
Well, I use that as the structure for when I come up against obstacles and other things, how to approach it. You know, and it's not always that systematic at first. And usually I have to get a few bumps on the head, go a few oh poor me's and a few oh my God, what am I going to do? And eventually I'll get to the point where I'll go, oh, wait a minute. I just apply this type of a structure and that will get me there, whether it's with spirituality or any other endeavor that I'm getting into. And, you know, the other thing that's interesting about that is that I battled for years and years. And I had to sort of take a leap of faith is because I could focus career-wise on continuing doing construction, which I'm very good at.
Yep.
Or I can move into this, I keep bouncing the microphone around, but move into this other field, which compels me. It feels in my life more important to me that I can have more of an impact in my own life, and then possibly in the legacy that we all want to leave moving forward. Yeah. Than I could if I just maintained that day in, day out time and effort in construction. There's only so much time we have in a day, really. Only so much time we have in our lifetime. But
yeah, and the more time, trust me, if one can stay healthy, which I've done, but thank goodness to the very sophisticated medical system with a pacemaker and 2 artificial hips, you know, and lobotomy, no, not that yet. But anyway, you know, extended life has its challenges, elderhood, but it is such a blessing to be a healthy elder. And that's part of our experiment aggregately of being human. In 1900, the average age of the average American was 47. And now it's almost 80. You know, maybe 80, around 80, 81 for women and 79, 78 for men. I know that sometimes it varies a little bit. But imagine that. I mean, science and technology, psychology, spirituality, all of it is part of the experiment of ever humanizing us into further possibilities. And now we're in the threshold of AI and you know, and this marriage of the organic and the inorganic, possibly, like in chips in our head and the like. And of course, there are some people who look at that and are horrified, like, oh my God, no. The true human is someone that, you know, is not electronicized in any way, but a totally natural human being. You know, no shoes on the feet. Be in the woods, smell the woods, feel the wood, feel the soil with your toes. It is good for you. And of course, that has been proven scientifically that if you walk in good soil with your toes, it actually has benefits for your body. They're having studies like that.
Are you referring to grounding or specifically the soil?
Well, and also grounding, of course. Yeah. You know, but the human experiment is a continuing one. And here is the tension with religions. Religion happens at a certain space of time in a certain circumstantial construct, and a religious system develops that seems to work for the people at that time. The rules, the norms, the beliefs, the attitudes that that religious system inculcates seems to help people to have the kind of society that people want together. You know, America, the Protestant nation. Yes, we have Catholic people. Yes, we have faith systems from all over the world in America, which is great. We're a salad bowl of different religious systems, you know, and how wonderful it is to be a professional who has so-called eaten from that salad bowl, has tasted some of the wisdoms of major faith systems. You know, like I said before, I was on television, the Interfaith Odyssey, for about 6 years or thereabouts. You know, every week, a half-hour show with a panel of us from different faith systems talking about a social issue, like bullyism, bully in school. What does your faith system say about bullies? And do you have any programs that help people to non-bullify themselves, or help kids to not be bullies, etc.? Wonderful salad bowl mixture. But what happens with many religious systems, they become tradition. Remember Tevye, you know? And they get stuck there. This is the truth. And this truth that really worked for us in the mid-1600s needs to be the truth in the mid-2000s. Not so. Because our human experiment, our human evolution has continued to move forth.
That goes, for spiritual and religious systems.
And hence, you need to develop a kind of a spiritual resilience in the religious systems that you develop, that they in optimizing terms, humanize us in the best way as the experiment goes on.
Yes, I totally agree with that. And I'm not sure. Well, I would actually go on to say that, you know, the terms that we choose to put things in now is more relevant and imperative than the words that they maybe chose thousands of years ago or hundreds of thousands of years ago. Regardless of who the words came from. You know, regardless of the guru, we are an evolving race, and we have to take these things and sort of reformulate them into a way that works for us now.
It may be the same thing that we're taking, but we're reformulating it. And reformulating may seem on the surface like, oh my gosh, you are violating the tenets of our system back when in the 1600s. No, we're reformulating it. But we have evolved since the 1600s. We understand the psyche like you don't. We understand the makings of society through sociology and social psychology and forensic psychology, etc., that you didn't. You know, we have so many cognitive tools as modern and postmodern people, you know, to evolve us, to move forth. Unfortunately, political and economic systems are the biggest potential albatrosses that keep us from moving forward in the way we can. You know, economic and political systems, you know, are those that want to be like, hey, put a steel ball around your ankles, Olaf, and I'll run 100. 100 yards.
Sure.
You know, and do it in a reasonable, 20 seconds. Steel balls in my feet. Maybe I'll do it in 20 minutes if I crawl. You know?
Right. Well, I mean, would you add religious systems to that list of political in the way that they can be interpreted?
If the religious system is politicized and overtied to a certain kind of economic privilege group, you know, like monarchs and oligarchs, you know, we are the true people of God because look at our success. God loves billionaires, not the poor people. Not the single moms who are just trying to get by raising their kids on food stamps and 2 or 3 jobs. You know, clean the office at night, work at some coffee shop in the morning, and some factory in the afternoon.
Right.
Oh, they're not worthwhile human beings. Only billionaires are.
Well, and I know, I mean, you speak rather well about them, but religion is still that word for me.
I know.
Yeah,
and, you know, in some sense, that's okay. It's okay.
For me, it makes sense.
It makes sense, and I understand your reference point. And your reference point, you are not wrong on the negative sides of religiosity, as I call it. Religion is a human construct. It isn't dropped down from the heavens as much as those in a construct want to believe. Oh, this is the thing from heaven, and anyone who is not part of this is going to hell. Really? No. religions, yes, under inspiration of the sacred, and long-term religions that have standing over time, and have theologies that shift over time. They to me are, you might say, legitimate systems to learn and benefit from. But the interfaith teacher and author, whose name eludes me at the moment, I'm sorry, he says, if you are a spiritual seeker and a spiritual oriented learner, he suggests, learn a system first. Become involved in a system. Like if you're a soul, you find, a lot of elements of the Jewish faith admirable. Well, join a Jewish community, and not Orthodox. Orthodox are probably not going to receive you unless you go through a rigorous, years-long, conversion and training. But maybe Reform Judaism, talk to the rabbi, get to know the rabbi, get to know some people, and see and learn.
In my experience, I am agreeing with you in the way that we stand on the shoulders of our predecessors.
Absolutely.
If we have to reinvent everything every time a new life comes into existence, we're not going to get very far. Mm-hmm. But if we learn from our predecessors and then take that and say, okay, well, I like this, and that's so much for that. But again, I can't overstate it enough that I believe the instructions, the code is built in, and our biggest detail right now is to get away from the structure that's over complicated our lives. Mm-hmm. And I believe in structure like playing a game. There has to be rules, there has to be structure to it. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, what even is it?
Right.
But as far we can't keep pasting on garbage to try and fix the problems that we created to begin with our man-made structure.
Right.
So essentially that's my long way of saying I agree with you.
So what's going on that fits our postmodern era is a postmodern expression of spiritual forms today, and basically individualized, atomized, if you will. And going back, is it Houston Smith? Is that the author that I'm thinking of? He says, once you have immersed in a system and have learned it well enough to, in a sense, to adopt it with good faith, and not meaning completely 100%, then having immersed in a spiritual system that kind of grounds you, then begin to explore other systems. What he says is people cut and paste because of postmodernism. They take a fragment. Oh, I like this about Buddhism. A tattoo. Yeah, how about the tattoo metaphor? No. Oh, yeah, I love this about Buddhism. Oh, okay, the Buddha tattoo. Oh, I love this from Hinduism. Okay, kind of a cloud of knowing tattoo. Oh, but oh my gosh, I love this about, St. Patrick, he Christianized, those heathen people who loved nature in Wales or Scotland, whatever that was then. But these nature-loving people incorporated Christianity into their spiritual sense, and hence their Celtic spirituality is weaved with the natural world. That Celtic spirituality is Christian in reference, but in practice is very, you might say, nature-oriented panentheistic. The sacred in all things, the sacred in the water, in the life-giving properties of water, the sacred in the inspiration of the glowing waters, Celtic spirituality. So you have the pre-Christian history sensibilities of the tribes of Scotland and Wales that became incorporated into a religious system, and so they became Christianized, but incorporated the two. Just like people from Africa with African ancestry. They bring an African spiritual sensibility to the Black American spiritual expressions. That's not stiff Protestant white Christianity.
Right.
Ours is the hymn, and it reminds me of the movie starring Whoopi Goldberg. There were 3 versions of it. Fooey, where to escape the mob, she plays that she's a nun, and she becomes a nun. Sister Act. And
that's a long time ago.
I know. And remember the contest at the end of the first year movie where she, revitalized, the kids in their music program and got the nuns to sing together beautifully. Even the Pope came to visit, an idealistic movie. But I'll never forget the key contrast between the 2 competitors that were likely to win the music trophy at the end of the year. There was a stiff white choir with kind of reddish robes standing in line. Da, 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 joyful, joyful, we adore thee. Very militaristic, very precise, really beautiful in their venue. Very orderly, very religious, very, even pre-modern. And now Whoopi Goldberg's group, dancing, different dress, hip-hop and singing, and individualized and yet so artistic, so, magical. And to me, that is a metaphor of today's spirituality, individualistic and yet somehow trying to meet each other versus da, 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 da.
Right.
Yep. There's enough people who love that da, 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 that churches still do serve people who still want that kind of choir, and that's okay. That's okay. That's their religious venue that they grew up with, want to live with, and want to die with,
Yeah.
Anyway.
Well, I mean, those things are neat, the cultural things to experience. I don't know if I want them every day or even every Sunday, but the cut and paste mentality about I like this system over here and this system. I'll have to look over that, the Houston Smith, but I think that again, it's not what I want to promote with this is a little bit different than we have in our modern culture. Is that we're not trying to get the information from other sources. We're turning into ourselves, and then we can use the other sources as a way to describe what we're experiencing. Much like you're talking about with the Celtic spirituality from Wales and Scotland, is that there's this, you're looking for, I can't remember the word you used, but the divine within everything.
Within everything.
Within every
Yes.
port and wave and existence,
Yes.
You're looking for the divine.
Mm-hmm.
And then as you look for these things, you find them. And as you find them, you need ways to describe them. You might want to come up with your own ways, but it helps if, certainly if you look at the ways that other people describe them in the past and what experiences they had, not to create.
May I do that?
Not to create your experience for you, but to help put context to it based on what our predecessors have done.
Today is St. Patrick's Day, so I'm wearing some kind of green. I know it's not shamrock green. It looks more like the Spartans, go State.
It's a very nice green, yeah.
But anyway, and go Michigan too, because Michigan and State are significantly in the NCAA. State is number 2 in the seeding.
Are they?
In the bracket, and Michigan is number 5 in the seeding bracket. I thought they were going to be 3 or 4.
Oh, this is in basketball? So
yeah,
in
basketball.
Right,
so I just want to say, Monster Hoops, which to me is a holy game.
Right. That's your game if you like basketball.
Oh, if I could have been a pro.
Yeah.
Basketball, number 1. Yeah. Tennis, number 2.
You used to play quite a bit, right? Yeah.
Oh, I loved it. I know. I could shoot. Not like Curry. I couldn't jump, but I could shoot.
Yeah.
I could frustrate tall guys.
Sure.
But anyway, that's another story. But the reason I went to one of my many resources on spirituality, there is this terrific book. It's quite huge. Celtic Spiritual Verse.
Mm-hmm.
And the authorship it's called Poems of the Western Highlanders from the Gaelic. G.R.D. MacLean, Something that caught my eye is a poem entitled The Eye. The Eye.
E-Y-E?
Yeah. E-Y-E. Thank you. Yeah, not capital I, And it just mixes the human experience and natural experience in a beautiful way. God gave the eye to human at birth and set it in one's head, that one might see the things of earth, the loveliness there bred. The eye looks out and sees the hills. It sees the living things. It sees the light that each where fills. It lends the body wings. The eye unto human doth show the path of daily tread. It warns of danger lairs below. The eye, it lifteth up the head. The eye of human holds one's desire. On things one lest it rest. Cool it looks or speaks with fire. The eye of seeing best. The eye reveals the inner person, the window of the soul. The single eye of honest scan that comprehends the whole. The eye of good, the evil eye. They each in us inhere. The eye of envy's hatred sly. The eye of laughter clear. Throughout our days, safeguard your eye. God grant we be not blind. Ward off the cataract, the sty, the bran, the mote unkind. Grant us to live with vision clear, as the McMary taught, whoever that is. Grant us the heavenly vision here, for traveling as we ought. Final two lines. O sacred mighty, bless the eye that in our human head doth lie.
Wow. Nice.
Isn't it? And why did I choose the eye? In part, to mention there is a whole approach to psycho-spiritual healing called attitudinal healing. And I was reminded in that when I was reorganizing my books, as I've mentioned, for weeks now.
Yeah.
Entitled To See Differently. Personal growth and being of service through attitudinal healing. Susan S. Trout, PhD, is the author. And it's a marvelous book on what's involved in attitudinal healing. Attitudes, in a sense, we all have attitudes toward life, ourselves, toward others, toward future, toward past. Our platform from which we operate is our attitudes. Mm. Attitudes are so critical, and Dostoevsky said, what is important is to see differently, to see maybe the immigrant not as a scumbag to be suspect and arrested, but to see the immigrant as a different person from me. Maybe they're illegal, maybe they're legal, but we'll work with them within the law to give them maybe privilege to be here or maybe not, to treat the immigrant possibly with dignity and respect rather than the automatic scum. That's an attitude. That's an attitude, you know. And I'm not for illegal immigration. I'm not a pro-illegal immigrant, you know, even though technically my family was an illegal immigrant.
You feel that's a problem, that people are being treated like scumbags?
Well, that's my term, yes. Yeah, in some cases they are. We see that in the news. And of course, faith communities are trying to protect immigrants in their communities, especially if it's heavy with immigrant people. You know, some are legal, some are not. You have the whole mix. And ministries are trying to treat these people with dignity and respect, but at the same time, try to help them with the law. Try to find a foothold of legitimacy, you know. But if you sweep a neighborhood and just arrest people because they look a certain way.
Well, politics itself is a game of extremes.
Yes.
Weaponization of fundamentally good concepts.
Yeah. Now, you know, there are basic steps in attitudinal healing. You look at your attitudes, you begin to rework your attitudes. It's a process. And she lays that out, you know, and the healing. She talks about healing your attitudes. Are my attitudes helping me to live life fully, richly, passionately, lovingly, kindly, productively? Or are my attitudes like steel balls on a chain holding me down? Attitudes of seeing the world with anger and through the lens of pain and through the lens of hatred. And these things can be healed. I mean, there is real teeth to this approach, real legs to this approach.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. And you know, I
was just to interject. I would say the attitudes are a result of, you know, your self-talk, essentially. And so how do we change that self-talk? And if this offers an exercise in that,
absolutely, yes,
perception and attitudes.
And very thoughtful questions, like the principle of love. The essence of our being is love. There are 12 principles that she goes by, and they are from esoteric spirituality. The first principle is the essence of our being is love, and that fits scripture, Christian scripture. First John 4:16. The sacred is love. Those who live in love live in the sacred, and the sacred lives in them. So the first question, she says, in working on your attitudes regarding how loving are you? What is your love style? Am I more conscious of the times I block my love essence as well as the time I extend it? For instance, I could be loving, but there are triggers, and suddenly those triggers create pain and anger. And instead of treating you lovingly, because of the triggers, subconscious or unconscious triggers, I treat you horribly, rudely, unkindly, unlovingly.
I get that. Yep.
So, you know, really work on how you're loving, how you're not loving.
Yeah, that's good advice.
You know, the number 2, am I more consciously aware of the love essence of others, especially those towards whom I feel conflict? Going back to that scene when those 2 guys said, hey, you should leave your job. Did I love them? No. Did I hate them? No. But really angry at the blue-collar type supervisor guy that I didn't get along with? Yeah, angry. Judgmental? Yeah, for a while. You know. But the other guy, when he just said straightforwardly, matter-of-factly, Olaf, you know, you're really good at this, but not at that. Okay. You know, I had a whole different attitude toward him.
Sure.
You know. You might say an appreciation, a painful appreciation, but an appreciation. The way he said it, hey, you're good at this, but not so good at that. Now, some people might say, oh, that was a clever manipulator. Of course. And I like good manipulation.
Right.
I don't like the feeling of not being aware of being manipulated. 3, have I become less fearful of my own thoughts and the thoughts of others? An interesting question. In looking at my love style, have I become less fearful of my own thoughts? That intimates love yourself. The essence of what's known as the gospel, the good news, the spiritual good news central to biblical thinking is love your neighbor as you love yourself. And psychology knows that how you love yourself is pretty much will mirror how you love others.
In a number of ways, they are you.
Yes, thank you. Yes. Number 4, has my sense of equanimity increased, particularly in stressful situations? That's a challenging one. I work at equanimity, being more Zen-like, but I have a kind of a reactive, passionate nature, so I can get off on from stress. But I quickly catch it, and then I say to the victims of my my stress reactions, hey, I'm sorry for going off, or I'm sorry for my impetuousness, or my loud voice, or my anger, or whatever.
And the more you catch it and exercise that Zenness, the better you get it.
Of course, practice, practice, practice. And that goes for psychic patterns. That goes for spirituality. Practice, practice, practice. Number 5, is there any difference in how I experience my day on mornings that I meditate? Now, the assumption here is you develop a meditative lifestyle. Part of your life, ongoing, will be meditation. Not necessarily trying to become a guru, a master guru, but maybe just basic meditation, mindfulness for 20 minutes. I would say, a baseline meditative style is to do an effective 20 minutes a day.
Because this is so important and because it is so difficult to commit to something like that, I would say if you can just zone out anytime you think about it and actively, consciously be like, yeah, this is meditating. I don't have to get in a lotus position. I don't have to put on fancy music or candles or sprinkle flower petals all over the floor. No BS like that. All I got to do is I found a time that I can just zone out for a second and explore. Meditate. To meditate means to listen.
Good.
It means to listen, and whether it is your thoughts. And I know that there's plenty of people that will argue with me. Not so much argued with them, but disagreed. Is that even if they are the thoughts, the incessant ramblings of the mind, it's not trying to fight them and suppress them and empty your mind, but simply to sit back in the witness position and witness what's going on through your mind.
And the biblical thinking regarding this is the well-known phrase, settle down to receive the still, small voice that is the sacred. The sacred is not in the thunder, not in the storm, whatever. Still, small voice. So the meditation, but you're right. I have moments. I mean, I'm a walking mystic. I zone out times all day. I don't mean zone all day out, but times it can be, I just do, and I find that to be such a grace in my life.
Absolutely.
Number 6, do I now take time to recenter myself whenever I lose sight of my essence? And that's for evening meditation. How did I do today? And we looked at the attitudinal sheet, that for the 10-step work. We looked at that sheet some time ago. We didn't have to go to that specifically.
Well, but it goes right back to the one right before it about the meditation. If you're recentering yourself,
right?
Recentering with the practice of meditation.
Yes.
Especially if you can center yourself in that witness position, in that consistency of the witness position, as opposed to the scatteredness of whatever you're
exactly
right now.
Right. Become your own witness to your experience, to your reality, and do it in the light of the sacred, and you will know. You will know.
Sure.
You will get some sense of what is right for you, what is a good way to approach tomorrow in light of today.
Because now you're the observer as opposed to lost in the character.
Yes. And number 7. And again, this is an example of just one page, regarding approaching the whole idea of our essence is love. Last question. Has there been any noticeable shift in the quality of those relationships in which I have been experiencing conflict? A biggie. And the word that comes to mind from, you might say, from Christian ethics is reconciliation. Have you developed the ability to reconcile? And it reminds me of an episode in, NCIS, where the director of the agency, a man comes to him, an older man, and he pushes him away. How dare you come here? Kind of thing. Like, he learned that this older guy was the father who abandoned the 2 children that this director ended up being a stepfather to and raised well. So their biological father abandoned the kids and he stepfathered them well. And toward the end of the show, he happens to be listening to one of the other staff talking about the importance of forgiveness. This is around Christmas season. And it was just so eloquent about the importance of forgiveness and giving people a chance and trying to understand them from their point of view, all of that good stuff. And by golly, at the very last scene of the show, you see him, the director, stepfather, saying to the kids, the camera is on the kids, hey, I want to introduce you to someone you have not yet met, but someone important in your life. And it's their father that abandoned them. Reconciliation. If our essence is love, we can develop the ability to work with people in which we are in conflict with differently. We have to work on ourselves first, our own attitudes. Part of the problem that gets people stuck is, I'm waiting till you change. Then maybe I'll be okay with you. If both parties are that way, that leads to divorce. You're the problem. No, you're the problem. No, you're the problem. No, you're the problem. Whereas if they each look in the mirror and say, how might I be the problem? Now there's some hope.
Right.
There's some hope. But if you look in the mirror with love, self-acceptance, not necessarily entire self-approval. Some of your behaviors with loved ones might not be approvable, but face it. Face the truth.
Many of my behaviors, in my case, over time, it's certainly your loved ones are the ones you're hardest on.
Right. So there's other principles of the 12 principles, and I'm not going to go over them now. Sometimes just listing, you can get over listing.
No, sure.
But I do want to pick up on it.
Coming up against it on your
I do want to pick up on attitudinal healing, to see differently. But we do see life through certain lenses. Who ground the lenses? Part of one lens, the loving, patient father that was always there. That's part of my being. The other lens, a reactive, bright, wonderful, but so mentally ill mother, paranoid schiz. The other lens. And out of that lens comes the attitude of people caught in the throes of mental illness are precious vessels to be healed, not to be discarded in the garbage.
Sure.
That's what my mother lens has done, has created in me over time a real passion and compassion for the mentally suffering. And here's the thing, folks. We all mentally suffer to some degree. It's how we deal with our mental sufferings.
Yeah.
That bears on the quality of our lives.
Well,
and the quality of other lives that we touch.
But it is that very suffering that builds within us that compassion.
That's true. It's out of suffering that compassion grows. The soil of suffering.
So,
yeah.
Awesome. It's a good place to end it.
Thank you.
Thank you.